recovery of any Americans. This is the first confirmed loss of a U.S. jet in Iran since the war began more than a month ago. I want to bring in senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. He has the very latest from London. So, Charlie, what do we know? What do we don't know or not know at this point?
Yeah, Kelly, so we just got that confirmation from U.S. officials who tell us that an F-15 fighter jet did come down over Iranian airspace, and a search and rescue operation is underway. A combat search and rescue is what they call it. Iranian state broadcaster aired footage, what they said was wreckage of a downed jet, and that wreckage was found in central Iran. In fact, one of the images appears to show an ejection seat. So the F-15 Strike Eagle fighter jet can be a one-seater or two-seater variant. So the number of crew involved is still unclear. A statement on Iranian television urging residents to join the hunt for the pilot or pilots, offering a bounty for any U.S. service members dead or alive. And there are reports from the Iranians, again, that there are heavy clashes underway between the Iranian military on the ground and the search and rescue attempts and teams, which obviously have to be conducted at low level, which, of course, puts U.S. service members at risk and within reach. Again, we're still awaiting the details about the status of the pilot or pilots, but it calls into question claims from U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and others that the United States and Israeli forces, for that matter, have achieved air superiority. In fact, moments ago, we just learned that the governor of that southwest province says whoever captures or kills the crew of that downed jet will be specially commended by the governorate.
Yeah, this certainly does change the situation here. I mean, based on what you've seen so far with throughout this war, I mean, how does this change the negotiations that may happen between Iran and the U.S.? I mean, it feels like a very different playing field than it was a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, well, Kelly, it goes down to air superiority. So it was actually a couple of weeks ago, I was in the region reporting it, that the United States and the Israelis said that they had essentially knocked out all of Iran's air defenses, meaning that they could not reach any of the fighter jets that were on these bombing missions. And we're talking about thousands of bombing missions with F-15 fighter jets alleged to have gone down, F-35 stealth fighter jets, F-22s that have been engaged in fighting and targeting these areas. And they said they've essentially been able to fly with impunity over these areas. Where this changes the playing field dramatically is the fact that, well, if this is what it appears to be, and that is that a U.S. fighter jet was shot down, not just crashed, but shot down over Iran, then it shows that they continue to maintain a reach. And I can tell you from my own experience from just reporting there, it was also claimed that the Iranians had lost 90% of their missile launch capabilities, and those are related. But the Iranians have continued to launch missiles, some of those longer-range missiles, both into Israel and U.S. targets, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, again, those targeting areas in that region, in the Gulf, even today. So there seems to be an overestimation of what the United States and Israel has been able to do to decimate Iran's air defenses, but we're going to have to find out more details about their capabilities at the moment.
All right, Charlie, appreciate that. I want to bring in CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean. He's a U.S. Marine veteran and a former foreign policy advisor on Capitol Hill, so the perfect person to have with me in this situation. So I want to start with what this fighter jet would have been doing in the region.
Well, you've heard the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, talk recently about how the military is able to move to dynamic targeting over Iran. That is to say, we have aircraft in the airspace conducting missions over Iran, but then they get retasked. They hear there's a missile launcher over here. You go fly over here and bomb it. And what that suggests is we are operating in a situation where we think we have air superiority, and our aircraft can essentially loiter over Iran and go find and prosecute new targets. Obviously, the longer you loiter, the more risk you have. It's possible here that the United States military may have missed one of Iran's higher-end air defense systems, or perhaps the Iranians were concealing it and saving it for later in the campaign. It's also possible, essentially, that a lower-quality system just got a lucky shot as this aircraft went by.
Well, because this is in broad daylight, too. So the lucky shot narrative could be more possible.
Well, in the search and rescue mission, I mean, there's astonishing images, we've seen and some proliferating across social media of Air Force C-130s, Black Hawk helicopters, variants thereof, operating low and pretty slow in broad daylight over Iran, looking for this downed aircrew. It's the kind of thing you would only do in a situation where you were willing to assume extraordinary risk because your objective was so important, namely saving some lives here.
And perhaps felt very confident that you did have that air superiority. We know that a search and rescue mission, is underway. What would something like that look like? I mean, this is hostile territory, obviously, that we're dealing with.
So there's a whole community of the United States military and of our Special Operations Command that doesn't get as much press as like the Navy SEALs and the Delta Force and guys like that. There's an Air Force Special Operations Command and a pararescue unit within that is dedicated to these kinds of missions. Those guys have been in the region, essentially staged and waiting for something like this. This is not to be flippant about it, but this is game day for them. I mean, it's obviously a tragedy if one of these crew members is hurt or, God forbid, dead, but they are out there doing the mission for which they've been trained year after year, and in an extremely hazardous situation where it's daylight, they're visible. Obviously, one of the ironies of an operation like this is you assume a lot of risk to go and rescue other people who have already been shot down.
And just give us the historical context. When is the last time that we have seen something like this happen, where a U.S. fighter jet is down in hostile territory and we have to go in and rescue? You
know, the truth is there's actually not been much over the recent decades, which speaks to sort of American military dominance in the kind of campaigns that we've waged. There was a jet that went down over Syria in the last decade. We lost a number of helicopters in Iraq and Afghanistan, but you really have to go back to the 90s to see a high rate of this kind of thing. The first Gulf War, for example, there were a number of aircraft shot down. Similar, fewer, but still a few shot down over the former Yugoslavia in the late 90s. We are not particularly used to operating in an environment where there's heavily contested airspace. Obviously, here in Iran, we're encountering that here about, 5 weeks into the campaign. It's a very serious consideration.
All right, Aaron McLean, appreciate your context and analysis. I want to bring in Elizabeth Palmer, who's in Tel Aviv this morning. Liz, can you sort of paint the picture of what we're hearing from Iranian state media?
Reading the tea leaves a little bit, because they haven't confirmed where this jet went down, but it does appear to be in Khuzestan province, which is right at the head of the Persian Gulf, very close to Karg Island, the great oil terminal that President Trump has threatened to take. Now, the governor has said that if somebody does find the pilot, who is assumed to be out there somewhere, there will be a reward of $50,000, which is a great deal of money in Iran. And if they do get the pilot, the Iranian playbook is sort of to put him on television. So if they do seize him, I expect that we'll see him fairly quickly on television as a sort of a very valuable, if you like, prize of war to parade in front of the U.S. and its allies. We're waiting to hear confirmation now from the Iranians. At the moment, there's just a lot of chatter and excitement, and this sort of general directive to people to go out and see if they can find what's assumed to be the missing pilot.
Yeah, the image that you have now put in my mind, Liz, of an American potentially on Iranian television, that certainly would change the narrative. Appreciate your time. It's a perfect segue to bring in Weijia Jiang at the White House, because, of course, Weijia, the narrative from the White House has been that Iranians' capabilities are decimated. We heard the president earlier this week in a primetime address. What are you hearing from the White House, if anything?
Kelly, at this hour, we are hearing nothing from the White House or President Trump, despite multiple requests, multiple texts, emails for comment. Nothing so far. But you're right that it was just 2 nights ago that the president addressed the nation and said that Iran had essentially been eviscerated and that it is no longer a threat. The president said, quote, "We've done all of it. Their Navy is gone. Their Air Force is gone. Their missiles are just about used up or beaten, taken together." So the president was really projecting that the U.S. was able to take out all of Iran's capabilities in terms of those things, but clearly that is not the case. So we are waiting to hear how this changes the calculation, Kelly, for how to proceed next and for whether this alters the president's plan for staying in Iran, for withdrawing, because clearly this is an escalation.
All right, Weijia, appreciate it. I just want to bring in Aaron McLean one last time. Weijia was just saying that this could change things. In your mind, Where could we go next? Because this certainly has changed the trajectory of this war.
Well, the Iranians are hostage takers by nature. It goes back to the origin of their very regime in 1979 and 1980. Our pilots are trained, assuming, and we're all praying that they got onto the ground alive and able to move. They're trained to evade, and they are trained, if captured, to act in captivity in a way that does credit to their nation. So we're praying for them, and we will have to see how the strategic calculus shifts, if at all. This is militarily not. It's the kind of thing you would expect to happen. If you fly these sorts of missions over Iran long enough, eventually you're going to lose something. Politically, we'll have to see how the administration responds.
And just quickly, last question. This could certainly change negotiations if you do have an American hostage on Iranian television. Does that change the Strait of Hormuz in terms of how this all comes together?
Well, it certainly, if the pilot has been captured or the crew have been captured and are in Iranian custody, this is another element of leverage for Iran. They've got the strait closed. That's their main aspect of leverage. But if they have the crew too, that's another point in their column.
All right, Aaron McLean, appreciate your time today. All right, just to recap, 2 sources confirmed to CBS News that a U.S. F-15 fighter jet has been downed in southern Iran. A search and rescue effort is underway. It is not known how many crew were on board. Coverage of this still developing story will continue on your local news and our streaming channel, CBS News 24/7. There will be complete coverage tonight on the CBS Evening News. Many of you will return now to CBS Mornings. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Kelly O'Grady in New York.
We've all been watching that CBS News special report on the developments out of Iran that a U.S. fighter jet was shot down over Iranian territory, a reward reportedly being offered to Iranians who find the aircraft crew, and a frantic search underway right now by U.S. forces to try and find them first. Let's bring in Mark Kansian. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good morning to you, Mark. This is still a developing situation. Can you help us understand the complexities of a moment like this and how the U.S. can calculate the risk of trying to find these downed service members?
Well, the United States has historically put an immense effort into rescuing downed pilots and prisoners. So they're pulling out all the stops here. We've seen videos of helicopters and C-130 refuelers flying over Iran, looking for the pilots. We likely know where they are because they have locator beacons. There are apparently firefights going on, and I would advise any Iraqis or Iranians that despite that large reward, stay away from the pilots because it'll get you killed.
And Mark, tell us a bit about the training these pilots have to have had in case that they were ever shot down. What might be their strategy right now and their mindset?
Well, they go through special training in the case of captivity and also about how to evade capture. There's an entire course that the Air Force runs, teaching pilots what to do, how to evade. But if they're captured, they're told name, rank, and serial number, make no comments that are derogatory to the United States. And these are officers, they're experienced professionals, and they'll stick to it. We've seen in the past that these captured aviators will remain confident and quiet.
Now, we're getting reporting that this is happening in or around Khuzestan province. It's relatively speaking in southwestern Iran, near the Gulf, near Karg Island, near the border with Iraq. What does this moment tell us about Iran's air defenses, considering Defense Secretary Hegseth had said that the United States had air superiority over Iran and that it had lost 90% of its missile launch capabilities? How do we square that with such an advanced jet being shot down?
Well, we do have air superiority, but we do not have air monopoly. In other words, we can fly anywhere we want. Keep in mind, we've flown something like 12,000 sorties, strike sorties. This is the first aircraft that's been lost. By historical standards, that's an extraordinary success. The problem is that when you have a population that many of whom don't support the war and is used to very low casualties, even one loss looks catastrophic. Right. So I think that in terms of what it means for Iran, their air defenses, not very much. We know that they have some short-range missiles, like Stingers that they've been firing at U.S. aircraft. A couple have been damaged. It was inevitable that one of them would be shot down.
All right, Mark Hansen, thank you so much. And if you're just joining us, we are reporting that an F-15 jet, the U.S. F-15 jet, has been shot down in Iran, and there is a rescue mission underway at the moment. CBS News has verified video showing a refueling plane and 2 helicopters in this area in southwestern Iran. It is a rural area, and Iranian State TV, an affiliate of Iranian State TV, has also reported that its crew has ejected from the plane, and it is urging Iranians. There you're seeing right now that refueling jet and the 2 choppers that are flying very low to the ground, presumably searching for the missing crew. We understand that there are reports that they are taking enemy fire. The fact that they're flying so low shows that they're willing to take on immense risk given the search and rescue operation that is currently underway. And we are seeing this video coming from Iranian State TV showing wreckage presumably captured and recovered from this crash site. We want to bring in now CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer, joining us again from Tel Aviv. Liz, bring us up to speed on what you're hearing at this hour.
Well, the Iranians haven't confirmed that this is in Khuzestan province at the head of the Gulf, but it does seem to be localized there because that's where the police have urged people to go out and search for the missing pilot. This is a tribal area. It's very remote, very dry, big mountains, wild terrain, and there are tribal people who unusually for Iran are armed because they're nomadic. Overall, there are very few guns in Iran in the hands of people, but this area is an exception. The governor has said to the tribal people and everybody, go and look for the missing American, and if you find him, there will be a reward of $50,000, which is a fortune for an Iranian. The Revolutionary Guard is reporting that they are in clashes with the Americans. They have said also that they've launched aircraft as part of the search/battle. That's unconfirmed, and frankly, it sounds somewhat unlikely, but it does look like there has been or is fighting as part of the search for this missing American pilot.
Liz, that gives us the sense that these next few hours are crucial in searching for the crew of this jet. You mentioning that it is a mountainous area with tribal groups who are relatively nomadic. I'm wondering then what that makes, what they will make of any potential reward from the government if these service members are found. Is it possible that maybe they would not hand them over? Maybe they might protect them. Maybe they might hold them for enough time before U.S. forces can find them. Help us understand how the region may be quite significant.
Well, that's a very good question. It's an area of Iran where unusually there are Arab tribes. They're not Persian-speaking, and there have been uprisings there. These are people who really don't like the central government. So I suppose it is possible that they might find the pilot and protect him or try and smuggle him out. But probably more likely, because the security forces will have been deployed en masse, that he'll be picked up by somebody who is either loyal to the regime or anxious to show that they're loyal to the regime, because this, after all, would be an enormous prize, and whoever found the pilot would get heaps of praise and be lionized by the regime and so on. I've asked my Iranian friends how we'll know if the Iranians do manage to find the pilot. And they say that the Iranian playbook really is to put them on television pretty quickly with a forced confession of some kind that they've been spying for America. You can imagine the kind of thing. And then it will become that pilot will become a hostage, and it will be he will be humiliated and paraded in the face of America. And of course, Iran will use him for maximum leverage.
Liz Palmer is in Tel Aviv, continuing her reporting, the first person on our air to confirm that these reports were coming out of Iran. Liz, stand by for us. We know we'll connect with you in the hours ahead. We want to jump to CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang. Of course, Weijia, the White House messaging previous to this moment from the president was that they're about to strike Iran back to the Stone Age. I know a short time ago they were slow to confirm information to you. That was a quote, direct quote from the president. What are they confirming now, and what is the administration saying about this incident?
Well, our team was able to confirm, obviously, that this incident has happened, all the details that Liz just laid out, but we have not heard a reaction from the White House or from President Trump, despite multiple attempts. We are waiting now to hear what he has to say, because remember, it was just 2 days ago that the president addressed the nation in a prime time speech. And he said that the country of Iran had been, quote, eviscerated, and that essentially there was no threat left. The president went on to say that they've annihilated all their defense and industrial base as well. He said their Navy is gone, their Air Force is gone, their missiles are just about used up or beaten, taken together. And the reason that matters is because he had been saying that for weeks, that essentially the U.S. does not have much left to do when it comes to achieving its military objectives, because he said so much had been taken away from Iran's capabilities. And when you have Iran striking down a U.S. fighter jet, that begs many questions about whether the assessment was in fact correct, or whether this is a one-off and Iran got lucky, because there is no doubt that the U.S. has taken out a significant amount. But the question is whether it really is as decimated as the president says. And, even the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, earlier this week, he said that, yes, they will shoot some missiles, but we will shoot them down. So he acknowledged that even though their capabilities were weakened, obviously they still exist. So that's why we're waiting to see what comes next for the president, and if this changes any of the things he's been saying in recent days about his plan to leave within 2 to 3 weeks.
All right, Weijia, thank you so much for standing by. Let's bring in CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean. He is a U.S. Marine veteran and a former foreign policy advisor on Capitol Hill. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a bit about this aircraft. Why would it be used? What do we know about it? And presumably, what do we think about the pilots ejecting? How would that work?
Right. So the F-15 right now in Iran is being used to prosecute bombing missions. There's not a lot of air-to-air combat to be had right now. The Iranian Air Force, such as it was, is not a major factor. So this aircraft would have been prosecuting targets in Iran or participating broadly in some sort of mission to strike targets on the ground in Iran. I've not heard it confirmed yet whether or not it's an F-15E. There are variants of this aircraft that have multiple crew members, so obviously that's very relevant if it's a search and rescue mission, because you may have 2 rather than 1 crew members on the ground.
We're just getting information via our team now that it is an F-15E fighter jet. The search and rescue is ongoing. It would have been flown by a 2-member crew. But what is the risk now in trying to find the crew? Because there are advanced helicopters. We've seen footage we've confirmed now of them flying quite low. What is how are service members trained for an incident like this if they have to eject? And what is the plan now? Yeah,
so it's one of the ironies of search and rescue missions in a combat environment is you're actually going to assume a lot of risk to a lot of aircraft and a lot of personnel to go get the pilots you've already lost. That's just sort of baked into the system. These pilots have been trained, obviously, in the the procedures they should follow if they're bailing out, they're ejecting. But also once they're on the ground, let's hope that they made it to the ground safe and conscious and able to move. They're trained to evade if captured. They are trained to comport themselves in a manner that does credit to their country. And then this whole apparatus that is sprung into action to go get them. There's a component of our special operations community that does this. There is an Air Force Special Operations Command. There's a whole portion of the military that, for these guys, this is what they have been essentially preparing their whole careers for. And it is extraordinary, some of this footage you see circulating of C-130s and Black Hawks, these propeller aircraft and helicopters moving relatively slowly, relatively low to the ground in broad daylight. It shows the amount of risk that they're willing to assume because of how important the objective is, namely to save the lives of these crew members.
So these would be Air Force pilots. Would they be armed?
Yes, yeah, they would have sidearms, but you know, depending on what they encounter on the ground, that's not a lot. You know, you would have a pistol essentially to defend yourself in extremis. The much better play and what they would be looking to do is hide, make contact with their rescuers, and get out without coming into contact, obviously, with any kind of enemy forces.
And the one thing you're looking for in these next few crucial hours?
I certainly hope we get news soon that both, if it is in fact a two-member crew, that both of these crew members have been located and brought out safely, and that we haven't lost anybody else in the effort to rescue them.
And the F-15 model is the same model that was shot down by friendly fire over Kuwait. Is that right? And the pilots in those cases, there were 3 planes. They all ejected safely?
That's right. Yeah. So we had 6 crew members, so 2 for each of the 3 aircraft, eject safely over Kuwait several weeks ago. If this this bears out, yes, this is the same kind of aircraft from the Air Force with 2 crew members we hope are alive. And by this point, as we're speaking, it's possible they've even been rescued. Obviously, the opposite is true as well.
Stay close. We'll need your insight throughout the day. We want to thank you, Aaron McLean, Mark Cansian, Liz Palmer, and Weijia Zhang for joining this special coverage.
That does it for us for now, but stay right where you are. Mugo Odigwe picks up our 24/7 coverage from San Francisco. Mugo.
All right, thanks, guys. And we're going to continue with that breaking news about the war in Iran. Iranian state media says they've shot down an American fighter jet and that the pilot is still alive. But here is the message from a governor of southwestern Iran province. It says whoever captures or kills the crew of the downed U.S. jet will be specially commended. I want to turn now to CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, just how significant of an escalation is this?
Yeah, Mugo, it's very significant. And I just want to sort of recap, because you said that maybe one pilot, because we got confirmation from U.S. officials tell us that F-15 fighter jet did come down over Iranian airspace. And that was search and rescue operations underway. And that's after Iranian TV said that an aircraft had crashed. There had been shot down and showed wreckage of that downed jet. And the wreckage was found in central Iran. So what we're talking about here is that F-15 Strike Eagle can be a 1-seater or 2-seater variant. As we understand, it's the F-15E, which can be a 2-member crew. A statement on Iranian television has urged residents to join the hunt for the pilot or pilots, offering a bounty for any U.S. service members found dead or alive. There are reports again from the Iranians that there are heavy clashes underway between Iranian military and the U.S. search and rescue attempts. We have to point out these have to be conducted at low level in broad daylight. Black Hawk helicopters, these are slow-moving aircraft within reach and at risk. So again, we're awaiting the details about the status of the pilot or pilots, but it calls into question, when you talk about how significant this is, claims from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and others that the United States and Israeli forces, remember, they're in this fight too, have achieved air superiority. In fact, we learned just a few moments ago that the governor of that southwest province says whoever captures or kills the crew of that downed jet will be commended by the government. And where this changes things significantly is because when the military sends fighter jets into a hostile environment, they target what's called standoff targets, meaning they target air defenses and launchers while staying out of reach. So achieving air superiority, it's a technical term, but that enables jet fighters to loiter, as the military puts it, to stay in the air for longer and get closer to these targets, and in some cases refuelers. So if it is a shoot down, not necessarily a crash, it suggests that the United States and Israelis have failed to dismember Iranian air defenses or decimate, obliterate, whichever term you want to use, or that the Iranians have been holding fire and keeping some of that their fire dry. Again, it's developing when it comes to the status of the pilot or pilots. All we know for certain is that what's called a combat search and rescue is underway.
And I want to ask about that because you talk about search and rescue. Obviously, there's a lot going on at this point, but what exactly does that entail? What does that look like? What can we guess or assume is happening at this moment?
Yes, you know, the United States military trains for exactly this sort of environment. It is very rare for a U.S. aircraft to go down, a fighter jet to go down in a hostile environment and to land in, quote, enemy territory. But these are U.S. Air Force pilots that would have been inside this F-15 fighter jets. But in addition to all of that, you will also have these search and rescue teams that are either already in the air just in case something like this happens, or they get fired up right away. So there will be locators on exactly where this jet was hit, where the debris was rained down. They would have locators on themselves. They'll be armed, and they've been specifically trained and drilled to go after what might happen in an event like this. And that's where you scramble the Black Hawk helicopters and what's called the Combat Search and Rescue, CSAR, that is scrambled to fly at low levels because they have to. They have to get close to the ground to figure out and get eyes on where these pilots might be and where they might be found. I'm not entirely sure, but of the topography or geography of that area, because I don't know it that well, but it's going to be rugged. Probably it's going to be remote. The fact that the Iranians themselves, even on Iranian television, have sort of urged locals to go out on the hunt and find these pilots suggests that it wasn't in a relatively populated area. But that puts U.S. service members at risk because they have to then conduct, under fire, a combat search and rescue to get these pilots out of there.
Wow. Okay, Charlie, thank you. And now I want to bring in CBS News Middle East contributor Courtney Keeley. Courtney, your take on what Iranian media is saying about this.
Well, Iranian regime media, and I'll make the difference between that. For first, state TV had a clear regimist anchor on with wearing the chador with only her face showing, reporting that a helicopter was shot and a pilot was down. Now, CENTCOM did not say anything about this, and then I started watching and following Tasnim. Now that is really the Iranian Revolutionary Guard affiliated media, and they were reporting it. Now, and it's completely unconfirmed, and I have to say this, and CENTCOM is denying it, but now Tasnim is saying that this fighter jet was hit and the pilot ejected, and then now they're offering that that bounty, that $50,000, which is, as noted by our correspondents, a fortune in Iran right now. Now the question is, where's the pilot? Did they actually have to eject? Are they actually on the ground? And will they meet people that are sympathetic or people that are part of the regime and will turn them over? The Iranian Revolutionary Guard really does remain in power, regardless of claims of missiles and what has been diminished and what kind of air superiority the U.S. has. This is happening in a more remote place, and it's a question of what will happen next. It's a fast-moving story, but what's been happening, and I have to say this, is Iranian state media, the regime media, keeps putting out things way ahead of what we are and making these claims, but some of them this morning so far have turned out to be true. So we're monitoring it, but we're not confirming anything until our NatSec people do and our Pentagon people do. But they are way ahead of this. They are using this clearly as propaganda in a celebratory way. And this has been consistent with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard maintaining power despite the hits on all of their top leaders. They have a broad and big backbench, and they keep putting other people in power. And they're seemingly intact in this way that they control the media. They control the internet. People, real people, the vast majority of Iranians can't put anything out. They can't go on X and say things without fear of death or people finding their Starlink, or they're just shut down. So Iranian regime media clearly in charge of this narrative right now, but we are waiting to confirm from all of our CBS sources.
Yeah, Courtney, I want to go back to what you said earlier, because you talked about how what happens to the pilot or the pilots all depends on the kind of person they meet, whether it's someone who's willing to help them or someone who wants to obviously get all this money from the regime. But there's also the fear that if you were to help them out, they too could be in trouble, whoever helps those pilot or the pilot. So what do you think could ultimately happen here? Is there even a chance that someone would be willing to go against the Iranian regime to help out that pilot?
I think if we look at from history and pilots that have been captured and held in places like the Hanoi Hotel, we know that they survive and they go on to great heights in leadership in the U.S. government in the past. We also know the absolute collective nightmare of Black Hawk Down in Mogadishu.
Yeah.
Everybody's hopes are that this is something that is the pilot does not get captured if they have ejected and if they are on the ground, and that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is not able to get into this more tribal area. And that would be the hope right now. And the U.S. does dominate the airwaves, the skies. And so while they dominate the skies, would they be able to come in and do a search and rescue, which really looks like it's happening? So who's in control? Iranians are in control of the regime narrative on the airwaves. The U.S. is in control of the skies. And what will happen next, we'll keep you posted.
Okay. Courtney Keeley, thank you so much. And now let's go to Washington and CBS News Pentagon reporter Eleanor Watson. Eleanor, so much happening here, but I want to ask again about just how significant this is. We first heard about this earlier this morning, and now it's very clear that this is in fact true. How significant is that?
Well, this is significant, Mugo, because it is the first U.S. fighter jet shot down over Iran since the conflict began. We first started seeing the claims from Iranian state media earlier this morning, and then U.S. officials confirmed that there is a search and rescue going on. We see a lot of claims by the Iranian media, as the Iranian regime media, as Courtney mentioned, but in this instance, it appears to be true because there are verifiable images of helicopters and a refueling plane flying low to the ground on a search and rescue mission. This is the first fighter jet shot down over Iran, but we have seen close calls in recent weeks. If you remember, I think I was talking to you, Mugo, when an F-35 over Iran was hit and then landed safely at a neighboring base. And that just goes to show you that there is a risk, even as the White House and the Pentagon talk about air superiority. That doesn't mean air supremacy. Iran still has missiles, still has some threats that are risks to this aircraft. This now we know was an F-15E, according to our sources, which means that there would have been 2 pilots on the fighter jet, and search and rescue is underway for both of those pilots, as Iran is offering a reward to anyone who captures them.
Yeah, and Ellie, at first there was that question as to whether or not this was an F-35 jet or an F-15 jet. Now you're saying it's an F-15E. If it was the F-35 jet, would that have been definitively one pilot inside?
I believe so, yeah. I believe so. This F-15E is a 2-seater, F-15's without the E, 1-seater, but the significance is still there because although they claimed initially an F-35, any fighter jet shot down over Iran is a significant escalation. And the F-35 a few weeks ago that was hit landed safely, and now Iran seems to have been able to either down this one or it has crashed over Iranian territory in southwest Iran.
Okay. Eleanor Watson, thank you so much. Right now, I want to go outside the White House for more on all of this with CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand. Natalie, are we hearing anything from the White House at this point about this?
Nothing yet, Mugo. Our CBS teams have been asking repeatedly. The White House press team, we're waiting, monitoring the president's own, social media feeds, and of course, U.S. Central Command, which typically refutes, incorrect or false information from Iran state media. But the last post I'm seeing from U.S. Central Command was about 3 hours ago. So nothing official yet. The president's earlier posts talked about the Strait of Hormuz, saying we can easily open the Strait of Hormuz with a little more time and, quote, take the oil and make a fortune. Prior to that, he had again threatened to hit bridges or even power plants, electric power plants in Iran if the regime, doesn't come to the table and make a deal. That's been the ongoing threat as we head into this critical weekend and that April 6th deadline that the president had earlier set. as you've been talking to with all of our teams and experts, this White House has touted the military success in Iran so far. The fact that, they say military commanders have achieved air superiority and largely, deprived Iran of attack capabilities. But what we are seeing is these retaliatory strikes continue. And this has the potential to really change the dynamic of what happens next. So, we're waiting for that official response, waiting to hear from our military leaders about all of this. Now, I also want to point out that, before Iran state media started talking about this downed U.S. fighter jet, they were talking about civilians that had been killed after that U.S. airstrike on that big bridge in Iran. The president also posted about that. And I spoke to one Iran expert yesterday who pointed out that, in Iran, especially following the president's speech earlier this week, there was a sense of escalation, not necessarily progress towards negotiations, but now an escalation in this conflict, and concern by people of Iran who have been long opposed to the regime, that this is now expanding on civilian infrastructure inside the country.
All right, Natalie Brand outside the White House for us today. Thank you. And now let's bring in CBS News national security analyst Aaron McLean. He's a U.S. Marine veteran and a former foreign policy advisor on Capitol Hill. Aaron, thanks for your time. Can you just help us understand the hardware that we're talking about here? What type of fighter jet is this, and just how many pilots would have been flying it?
Right. So if, in fact, this is an F-15E, as has been reported, you're looking at 2 crew members. This is an extremely capable platform that would have been doing air-to-ground missions or participating in some sort of broader air-to-ground operation over Iran. It's not our stealthiest or newest aircraft. It's not an F-35. It's not invisible to radar or anything like that, which you could speculate perhaps made it more vulnerable to whatever brought it down in the last 24 hours. But it would essentially have been in the overhead over Iran, either going after pre-planned targets, or you heard the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, say in his briefing a few days ago that we've been shifting to so-called dynamic targeting. So it's possible it was over Iran and just taking targets as they were found. You do that long enough, you do that kind of thing week after week, and people are going to shoot at you, and eventually something like this is going to happen.
Yeah, and we're obviously still working on getting more information, but can you tell us more about what we know about exactly where that plane came down?
Well, this is sort of the western portion of Iran where these operations appear to be happening. It's a very mountainous part of the country, a tribal part of the country. There are sort of non-Persian Arab tribes in this area. It's we can presume a kind of complex situation on the ground. It's obviously extremely hazardous. Anytime you eject out of a fighter jet, it's not an easy day at the office. These crew, and we're all praying that they made it to the ground alive and able to move. I mean, they are trained to escape and evade. They're trained to resist, and they are trained, if captured, to behave in a way that reflects credit on their nation. So we've got them in our prayers right now.
And that was going to be part of my next question for you, because you talk about the crew being able to eject, and hopefully they were in fact able to do that. But then the part about evading a capture, how could they possibly do that after getting off that fighter jet?
Practice, practice, practice. There are whole schools devoted to this kind of thing for these pilots. And look, I mean, again, fingers and toes crossed, they made it to the ground alive, conscious, able to move. The idea is to buy as much time as possible, to stay away from the bad guys, to give time to your rescuers to find you and get you off the ground. And that's what we've seen in some of this incredible footage that's circulating of, C-130s, these propeller aircraft, these specialized Black Hawk helicopters in broad daylight, low over the ground in Iran, moving relatively slowly, looking for these guys. There's a whole community within our military. There's an Air Force Special Operations Command that doesn't get as much press as the components of the Navy, like the SEALs, the Army, like the Delta Force. They don't get as much press as those guys, but this is what they do. They have been training for this essentially their whole careers for exactly this moment, and the footage reveals they are out there trying to find these downed crew members.
And we saw that message from Iran basically saying that anyone who is able to capture the pilots, that they will be rewarded. Do you think this is sort of a victory propaganda for the Iranian regime?
Well, if they capture a pilot, it certainly will be a source of leverage for them in the ongoing negotiations with the United States of America. Look, I mean, the Islamic regime in Iran, these guys are hostage takers by nature. It goes back to 1979, 1980. It's sort of at the core of how they operate. It's not a good day. It's absolutely not a good day if one or both of these crew members are taken into custody by the Iranians. They will absolutely use it for propaganda, for morale, and as negotiating leverage with the United States.
Yeah, and I hate to ask this because we are obviously hoping that those pilots or the pilot is able to escape and be rescued, but what could possibly happen if they are captured?
Well, they would be in the custody of the Iranians. I mean, there are complexities here, like who do they encounter on the ground? You know,
Right.
Are the people on the ground in this particular western portion of Iran friendly to the regime? Are they hostile to the regime? This regime is not universally popular, to say the least, across Iran. So we can't know exactly what happens, but let's assume the sort of nearly worst case scenario. Obviously, worst case would be that they're dead, but the nearly worst case scenario that they're taken into custody by the Iranians. I don't know that they could anticipate treatment that is friendly and kind. They've been, again, trained for this. They've been trained for circumstances in which they are under extreme duress. They're prepared for this, but this is an extraordinarily difficult circumstance, of course, to find yourself in. And it's what our servicemen and women put themselves on the line for every day.
Aaron, just a few days ago, we heard from President Trump. He addressed the nation. He talked about how the United States basically has air superiority when it comes to Iran. And he also talked about how in the next few weeks you're going to see more of those strikes against Iran. And now today we are talking about this, something that I assume the Iranian regime basically sees as a victory, a turning point for them. What does it say about the message we have heard so far from the president about how this war is going?
Yeah, I mean, there may be some confusion in rhetoric here. You can have air superiority, but if you're flying combat missions over a country day after day and this country is fighting back, they're going to shoot at you. And eventually, give it enough time, give it enough missions, something is going to get through and you're going to get into trouble, which seems to be what happened today. In purely military strategic terms, assuming that there are not more losses or more complications from the operation to rescue these crew, in purely military terms, this is actually not that significant. You would anticipate and plan for and prepare for something like this happening. The significance is at the political level. What happens if these pilots are captured? What happens if the Iranians use this for leverage? How does our presidential administration respond to this? That's obviously an enormous factor going forward that's going to play out over the course of the coming hours.
And Aaron, when we look at the big picture here, because I'm sure there are many Americans who are thinking, when is this going to be over? How can this be over? From your experience, what would it take to put an end to the ongoing war?
Well, I think the major point of leverage that the Iranians have, setting aside this downed aircraft and the fate of the crew right now, which we don't know, the main point of leverage that they have is their control over the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. You've seen the president say in recent days that he's willing to just walk away and leave the strait as essentially somebody else's problem, the problem of the Europeans, the problem of our Asian allies and partners. It's hard for me to imagine how that's actually feasible in the sense that, you know, oil is a finite commodity. The United States may not actually get most of its oil from the Persian Gulf. That's true, and the president keeps making that point. But if there's a restricted supply to oil globally, the price is high in America, even if we're not getting it directly from the Persian Gulf. So I do think you're going to need to see some sort of policy to get the strait reopened, whether as part of the deal, whether as some sort of follow-on operation. And that's awkward for this administration because it promised the American people a 4 to 6 week war.
Okay, Aaron McLean, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate your insight.
Of course.
And if you're just joining us, we've been following breaking news for you. An American fighter jet downed over Iran. Search and rescue is underway right now. We have much more news ahead this hour. Stay with us. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We'll be right back.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
The
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Something that's undeniable.
with mindfulness, innovative,
Magical.
It's like being a child.
and truly original reporting.
God, you do your research. I tell a good story.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The 18-year-old soccer sensation igniting worldwide buzz.
How good is this kid? The defenders are just bewitched.
Lamine Yamal.
You ever talk to the soccer ball?
I'm Major Garrett in Washington, inviting you to the Takeout. Politics, policy, people, and pop culture served up weeknights. What's on the menu? Plenty. The day's happenings with curiosity, informality, and humor. It's serious discussion, but we do not take ourselves too seriously. Who is a better speaker, Mike Johnson or you? Oh, come on. Join me on the Takeout. Streaming right here on CBS News 24/7.
You both had talked about going on Survivor together.
Right. A Survivor contestant believes his sister was murdered.
I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you.
And is determined to be her voice.
This is her speaking to everyone saying, don't let this happen to you.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Chilling with the queen, her name is Gail King.
Hey! CBS.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning.
CBS Morning. CBS Morning.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS. CBS Mornings.
I want a mug. Yeah, good mug.
A stalker sends menacing messages to a young mother before she's murdered.
They all just kind of said, I can't believe this happened. He did it. The stalker did it.
There's a killer out there, and we're gonna go after him.
But the investigation reveals a sinister setup.
I think his head is spinning, thinking about what else are they gonna find.
48 Hours, now streaming on CBS and Paramount Plus.
Money Watch is your no-nonsense guide to taking control of your finances, where I offer practical, real-world advice with no jargon and no judgment. I'm Jill Schlesinger. Listen to Money Watch wherever you get your podcasts.
It could be the greatest turnaround in college football history.
What is the magic here?
The undefeated Big Ten champs, Indiana Hoosiers.
CBS Morning.
CBS Mornings on CBS and where else? Paramount Plus. See you at 7.
CBS Mornings.
Here's a look at some of the other headlines we are following for you at this hour. The Environmental Protection Agency says microplastics and prescription drugs are now on its top priority list of pollutants. The news came during a joint announcement yesterday with the Department of Health and Human Services. Health Secretary RFK Jr. unveiled a $144 million program called STOMP, which stands for the Systemic Targeting of Microplastics. They say it's the first step toward controlling of these sources of contamination in the environment and people's bodies. New testimony from the Maui doctor accused of trying to push his wife off a cliff last year. Gerhard Koenig took the stand for a second day yesterday. He insisted that he hit his wife with a rock in self-defense during a hike, but prosecutors argue Koenig was angry about text messages he thought indicated his wife was having an affair. And federal prosecutors say Atlanta rap star Gucci Mane was kidnapped and robbed at gunpoint inside a Dallas recording studio. The Justice Department says 9 people, including Memphis rappers Pooh Shiesty and Big 30, are charged in the January incident. Investigators say the victims were lured to the studio for what they believed was a business meeting. Instead, they were apparently robbed at gunpoint of cash, jewelry, and watches. If convicted, the suspects could face life in prison. Pam Bondi is out and Todd Blanche is in. That is the latest shakeup within President Trump's cabinet. It's the second time this month that he's fired one of those members. The president